There seems to be a trend emerging from the European Union recently where they just basically are trying to get rid of everything that is not being made in the EU. And this also means software, and this generally means Microsoft products are being phased out by individual municipalities or federal states or organizations. This is not a new trend, but it's been really reinforced by the current geopolitical situation, and I wanted to explore all the things that have been done to move away from Microsoft, why it matters, but also why it could still very much completely fail and result in a whole big pile of nothing. But if it does result in something, it could very well prop up Linux and open source immensely. So let's talk about all of this, and let's talk about our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. It's your all-in-one platform to create, publish, and manage your website. Squarespace has really easy tools to make sure that anyone can end up with a really nice looking and well-optimized website, no matter if you know how to code or not. They have what they call their blueprint system, which lets you pick from a variety of templates that are pre-built and will suit any type of website, whether it's a simple blog, an online store, a video platform, whatever. All these templates are optimized by default to give you good SEO, but they also add some SEO specific tools on top of that to make sure that your website just doesn't end up on the last page of Google. On top of that, to go further, Squarespace has their own design engine to create your own pages. You can just drag and drop elements where you want them, you can change all the colors, the fonts, you can just tweak the templates however you want. And once you have something you like, you can add extra features like your own online shop with a payment system, you can design your own logo from Squarespace, you can book your own domain name to have an easy to remember address. So check out squarespace.com/TheLinuxExperiment or just click the link in the description below and you'll get 10% off your first website or domain purchase. So let's begin with Germany, because there is one of the federal states, Schleswig-Holstein, who has been starting a transition to open source and Linux a long while back. They were probably one of the pioneers in the EU trying to ditch Microsoft, and they did so. They had announced their plan to move away from Microsoft Office and also from Windows a few years back, but now they're actually implementing it. They very recently announced that they were going to move 30,000 government computers away from Windows and from Microsoft Office to try and rely on Linux, but also LibreOffice instead of Microsoft Office. They're also ditching Microsoft Teams. Basically, they're trying to be Microsoft free entirely, or as much as can be. Another one that made a big splash but wasn't entirely accurate was Denmark moving to Linux and open source. Now, their initial interview reported that Denmark's Ministry of Digital Technology was going to move away from Windows and from Microsoft Office. Now, this interviewer apparently misunderstood some statements from the minister. They were not going to move away from Windows, they were just going to replace Microsoft Office in the ministry, which led a bunch of people, myself included, to misreport that thing, which I then corrected in the next video. But it's still an intention to move away from Microsoft products. They're going to replace Microsoft Office with LibreOffice, and Linux could very well come in the future. In France, where I live, the city of Lyon also decided to ditch Microsoft Office and might also ditch Windows in the future to replace it with Linux. They're not moving to LibreOffice, they're moving to only Office, but it's still a move towards an open source solution instead of the proprietary Microsoft-made one. They're also replacing their entire digital suite by open source tools, although this has not really been explained as well, so maybe it's just a plan and they don't have the solutions in place just yet. And in France still, our Gendarmerie Nationale, which is basically some form of military police, is already relying on Ubuntu. They're using what they called Gend Ubuntu for Gendarmerie Ubuntu, which is basically just a slightly customized Ubuntu, and it's being kept up to date, and my stepfather is actually using it and asked me to put Ubuntu on his own personal computer because he knows how it works, which is another pretty big move. There are a lot of gendarmes in France. Now, of course, not all of these transitions that happened in the past stuck or worked. For example, back in 2003, Munich decided to ditch Windows to go with Linux, with their own Linux distro called Linux. probably MOOCs for Munich. They moved 14,000 PCs from Windows to Linux and stuck with that for about 10 years, after which they decided to go back to Microsoft because the costs were just too high. And all of these changes that we're seeing in the EU currently could suffer the same fate, except there are some indications that now is a better time to try and do this transition. So let's talk about why this is actually happening, why this could work, and why it could still fail. So why is this all happening? And I'm going to talk about the EU here, but it's not just the EU. A lot of other countries in the world are already moving away from Microsoft, whether it be North Korea, China working on their own Linux systems. You have India, who is a big user of Linux as well. A lot of other countries are also doing the same or have done the same in the past. But I'm going to focus on the EU because this is where this transition seems to be accelerating. So why is the EU trying to ditch Microsoft products? I think it's basically just the geopolitical context. The EU and the US used to be pretty close friends. We traded with each other, we kind of liked each other, we aligned our policies with each other, but this is starting to break down. The current US government really does not like the EU, and the EU really does not like that the US doesn't like us. And so we're starting to realize that maybe having all of our technology depend on one single government that can change pretty quickly and change pretty radically is not a good idea. So plenty of municipalities and cities and governments are starting to look at alternative options. The issue is we do not have big proprietary tech companies in the EU, nothing comparable to Microsoft, Google, or Apple. We simply never built those because there was no reason to. Because the stuff we could buy from US-based companies worked for people. There were tons of issues, and all of us Linux users know about those problems, but for governments and organizations, it was just the all-in-one package. You can sign up, you can buy, they will install it for you, everyone knows how it works. It's just the easy solution. But now, if something happens with the US and they decide to force Microsoft to shut down all the services for EU countries, we're left without any kind of technological infrastructure at all, which is obviously disastrous. This was never something EU countries could ever envision, but now it starts to become kind of a potentiality, and so everyone is kind of scared about this, which is why some places are starting to move away from Microsoft products. The thing is, since we don't have a local EU-made technological champion, the only real alternative is open source solutions. Thus, Linux, LibreOffice, OnlyOffice, maybe Mattermost for discussion, maybe Jitsi Meet for Visio, maybe Nextcloud for everything cloud related. Those are the solutions we do have access to. Some of them might be developed in the US as well, but they are open source. And so if you want to have digital sovereignty over your software stack, you actually can. And we do have companies based in the EU offering Linux distros like, for example, SUSE, which is based in Germany, although it might belong to a US-based company now. I'm not sure the buys and sells. I stuck to the Novell kind of era, but maybe things have changed drastically since then. So that's the first reason, digital sovereignty. EU wants to have control over their software stack. And people are slowly realizing this. There is no coordinated EU effort to try and transition all member countries to the same stack managed by the EU or anything, but there are plenty of options, alternatives, and propositions. The second big thing is cost. Microsoft has updated their cost policy quite a bit. Things are now super expensive, which is what happens when you have a monopoly, when everyone uses Microsoft Office and Google Docs is basically the thing students use, but companies mostly rely on Microsoft Office because, let's be honest, if you need Excel, Google Sheets is not cutting it at all. Well, if you have a monopoly, you can raise your costs. When everyone uses Windows, you can raise the cost of licenses, you can raise the cost of support, you can force people to move to the latest OS or force them onto more costly support plans as well, which means staying on Microsoft solutions is getting more and more and more expensive. When moving to open source, on paper, looks free because you don't have to pay any license. Now, this is not the case. It is not free. Replacing your entire software stack by something else costs a lot. You have to pay people to analyze, find a solution, prepare the package, deploy those, update them, maintain them, offer support, train your people. It costs a lot of money, sometimes more than what you would have paid for Microsoft products, at least initially. This is why most of those efforts in the EU failed relatively quickly, because municipalities expected something pretty cheap. But that's not what they got. They got a lot of maintenance, a lot of support costs, plenty of small companies adding their costs together to provide support, to provide the transition, to provide the update, and in the end you realize you're paying more. You would maybe have paid less over 10, 15, 20 years, but initially it might cost you more. Now, with the raised and updated prices of Microsoft, maybe that's not really the case anymore, but it's still a costly transition. And you have to find replacements for all the tools that were provided. And since there are no big actors that will provide a turnkey solution for you, you do have to find companies, partners, or hire people that know how to proceed with this transition, which is costly and not necessarily super easy. So these are the two main reasons. Now, why is it a good thing to have more countries moving away from Microsoft? Well, first, obviously, having a giant technological hegemony where everything Western is powered by Microsoft, Apple, or Google is obviously a terrible thing. You don't want all countries to depend on one single other countries and the laws that could be made there. You don't want to depend on what is virtually one single company out there. You want variety, and this is provided with a move to open source. Second, open source is inherently better and more ethical than proprietary software. It is collaborative, you can tailor it to what you need, and if most EU countries or municipalities move to Linux and open source solutions, you can expect contributions, because at some point they're gonna think, oh, we do need to do this, but this feature is not in LibreOffice or OnlyOffice or Linux, but we kinda need it. Who has resources to pay for those developments? Countries do. They do have a lot of taxpayer money that is generally not very well used, but could be better used, maybe paying some developers to help provide certain features to certain projects. This is good for the open source community. Now, you might say, oh, I don't want any country putting their dirty fingers in my code base, which, fair, but at that point, you still have leverage to say, no, my project will not accept this contribution because it does, I don't know, facial recognition or whatever else. At that point, the country can fork the open source stuff, keep their sovereignty over their tech stack, and keep developing stuff. And since they're contributing to an open source project, they have to contribute their stuff open source. Everyone can monitor what is actually being done. It's good for everyone involved. Even if it is a nefarious feature, it's still pretty good to see what is being developed and how it works. The other good side effect is if countries, entire countries, move to Linux, to open source, it probably means that people, when they go to school, will learn on those tools, because this is the official set of software provided for government employees and endorsed by the government. Meaning, if you're at school, you probably learn to use Linux, LibreOffice or OnlyOffice, Jitsi Meet, and whatever else. And when you trained on that, it means that when you arrive on the market, you're gonna ask for your employer to use those things as well. You're gonna want to use Linux, you're gonna want to use LibreOffice or OnlyOffice or whatever else. This might take a lot of time to be implemented, but at some point, if this change starts at the bottom with school, students, then this change is gonna go back up all the way up to companies, because you can't force your entire new workforce to use tools that they never learned to use. It's gonna be cheaper to provide them in the long run with something that they know how to use, rather than just force them to use Microsoft products and retrain them to use those things. Which is, I think, again, a net positive for everyone, because it means open source and Linux puts their foot in the door. Now, of course, this is currently all wishful thinking. We've only seen some small initiatives here and there. A German federal state, an organization inside of France, one city inside of France, one Danish ministry. It's not like the entire country is moving to Linux and LibreOffice and the Nextcloud. This is still getting the ball rolling. We're seeing more and more of those initiatives. Now, whether these are knee-jerk reactions or an actual will to change how software is run in the EU, it is unclear. We don't really know. We'll only know in 10 or maybe 15 years. And this could all still fail. You can see Munich running Linux for 10 years and deciding to go back. Some people say that this is because Microsoft paid the executives or officials there to move back to Microsoft, which is entirely something Microsoft would have done, that's for sure. But we don't know. Maybe just their solution wasn't working. The thing is, Linux is in a much better place than it was back in 2003 or even 2013. LibreOffice, OnlyOffice are in much better places as well. These are tools that are ready. Using a web app on Linux works just as well as using a web app on Windows. For most people, LibreOffice or OnlyOffice, if you're trained to use it, it's gonna do the exact same task that you wanted to do on Microsoft Office. This is a better place to try and implement that transition. It is absolutely in a much better state right now. Linux and OnlyOffice and basically our entire open source solutions, they are in much better places than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. So it is the right time to implement that move. When Microsoft is trying to push Windows 10 to Windows 11 and making millions and millions of computers suddenly obsolete for no reason, when they're trying to raise the prices, when everything is just getting super expensive, trying to implement another solution is the right time. Now, whether this will work or fail, we don't know. We're gonna have to wait. This could very well be erased by a big fat check from a big tech company. If relations with the US get better over time, this could all be abandoned, thinking, oh, you know what, this was just a scare. We can just go back to Microsoft. The US can be trusted again. This could all die down. But right now, there is great momentum behind Linux, behind open source, and if this actually goes through and the EU detaches itself from the US big tech companies, then this could be the biggest opportunity for the entire open source community that we've probably ever had. For Linux, for open source software, it would be absolutely amazing. It is a great thing for EU citizens, for Linux, for open source, and I think for the world in general. Tech hegemony is never good, and moving away from that is fine. Anyway, this will conclude my reflections on this topic. I hope you enjoyed the videos, and I'll leave you with this segue to our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. Now, you all know about them by now. They make laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed. They have plenty of options for all use cases at all price points, and personally I only use their stuff. Everything that you see from me on this channel or hear from me as a podcast or whatever I make is done on one of their laptops, the Tuxedo Infinity Book Pro 16. It's right there, currently recording with OBS, and I do all my gaming on one of their computers, the Tuxedo Cube, which is basically my gaming console in my living room. They're really cool, they have lots of options, plenty of keyboard layouts, they're nice. Click the link in the description below to learn more about them and get yourself a computer from them if you need to replace your computer, of course. So thank you all for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, just like always. You know where all those YouTube buttons are and why you should click them. And in the meantime, I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye.